Hello, welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. Very excited to have Justin Lacche here today, Fortune 500 Omniverse expert. Going to get into that a bit here today. Also the commissioner of the Omniverse Sports League. Justin, thanks for joining us.
Jason, thanks for the opportunity. And I want to let your listeners know, I was told these will be the hardest, most gangster Web3 blockchain business questions of the week. I'm ready. Let's do it.
That's correct. That's accurate. Verbatim at that. So excited that you have that same outlook towards today's discussion. And thought we could begin by familiarizing the audience with yourself. What have you done from the time you were born till getting here today?
Well, first, if you ask my 21-year-old daughter, I'm the most boring man in Portland, Oregon. So I had to come clean with that in the podcast first. But aside from what my daughter said, I have my narrative is twofold. I'm a first-generation American, came from very humble backgrounds. And I think, Jason, you and I, we've talked about this before. We'll talk about why that's empowering later in the show for blockchain. But in my business career, I have two central narratives. Number one, I recently retired from a Fortune 100 company where I led virtualizing Web3 and new technologies into operational hackathons. So my goal was to demystify future tech in large corporations and then to empower everyone to use it. And then, audience, we have to keep it clear. Jason, your beloved host, is a Dodgers fan. Yes, I am a part-time San Francisco Giants executive since 2010, but to show you how powerful Web3 is, here we are together. But in the Major League Baseball and minor league baseball space, despite the fact that I think, if we're being honest, Major League Baseball, which is today's opening day at the time of recording, has its issues, I'm proud to say I was part of a group that actually was the first of all of the major North American sports to empower accepting cryptocurrency for in-stadium purchases. And as Jason and I will talk about, those are the use cases that I'm very proud about. But for all of you as listeners, I'm an entrepreneur and an entrepreneur in heart. And like all of you, I believe that Web3 and blockchain-based technologies, if applied authentically, can create historic wealth and opportunities the world over.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. Also wanted to point out, you're in the Northwest, Portland, Oregon area, as you had mentioned. Thought we could touch on Nike a little bit too, because when I think of Northwest comes to mind. And I really like the progression of everything you've done to date and how it's led into the Omniverse Sports League. So basically, you've had an understanding the way professional sports, multi-tiers, multi-disciplines work. You understand the ins and outs of the business, and you've been able to use that in building these ecosystems in Web3.
Yeah, Jason, I appreciate both the question and we talked about the context. This is no secret to any of your listeners. The biggest problem statement with sports, and we pick sports because sports, culturally speaking, is one of the easy metaphors in any walk of life to give examples from business. But the primary business problem statement that was presented to me from many different athletes and owners was multiple leagues went bankrupt because of Corona, not teams. The AAF, XFL 2.0, multiple minor leagues went bankrupt because they had no operational digital lever. So I felt that in talking with our investors and athletes and fans, this was not only a great opportunity, it was our moral responsibility for those of us who believe that sport can empower business across the world to actually build a business model, which we have today in the Omniverse Sports League, which is this. We have 4 teams for now. We'll talk, Jason and I will talk a little bit more. We have 16 teams who want to join, but we have 4 teams as of today who compete in real world sanctioned minor league sports in different sports: baseball, cricket, handball, basketball, soccer, others. Those same teams have a Web3, blockchain-based, metaverse-based flavor that the athletes, coaches, and the league can not only monetize, but evangelize social issues, forward-looking technological issues under one single brand. So in the short term, we're COVID-proof. In the long term, We are a business model that we feel anyone on earth in any business can use, where you can be brick and mortar and metaverse in a way that's authentic for you. And not only can you survive the great challenges that come to you, you can actually monetize and grow in ways beyond the imagination.
Right. The scale that's available in Omniverse is the scale that's available online as a whole. And watching different groups in the industry incorporate Web 2 over the past some odd years, it allows for that many more individuals to get involved. Is that one of the key reasons that leagues are looking towards blockchain? They are looking towards Omniverse type scenarios? Are there other aspects of a multi-ledger system or interactivity for everyone involved that is attractive to these companies? I know you mentioned the financial aspect.
It's a great question. The answer is yes. And I think what you and I have talked about going into this show is, and what I really appreciate the depth that your audience brings to this particular show is, yes, and it really is, it's the code that sets you free. So
Yes.
what you know and what your listeners know is not all Web3, not all blockchains, whether it's private, internal, a large Fortune 100, or public, which is a metaverse you can participate or invest in, not are all coded the same. But that being said, looking at it at a more base level, the more we can actually democratize base decision making through smart contracts, through NFTs, through competition, through commerce, but still authentically still have the human side of how we show up as a business, investors in a community, everybody wins. So I believe, as you do too, that it's not just that Web3 is sexy because you don't need to have 15 people to sign a contract. It's sexy because instead of us watering down who we are to fit into a Web2 brick and mortar artificial paradigm where we have middle people just for the sake of having it, we all can create wealth. We all can show up better. And by the way, our customers can be much more innovative in how they want to engage, so that healthy pressure elevates everybody.
Healthy pressure elevates everybody. It pushes us. It is that driving force between groups. I love it. Love how you pointed out not all blockchains are created equal, coded in the same fashion, of course. And what is the distinction? You use Omniverse in your title, use Omniverse in the name of the sports league. What should audiences really be taking in as you say Omniverse? I mean, we've been able to talk to multiverse founders here. What is the differentiator? What does it encompass?
I think that the practical application of Omniverse is that the digital blockchain-based representation of people should be seamless to the real world, but not replace it.
Mm.
And I think that, by the way, and unlike you, I'm smarter every 15 minutes in this business. So I by no means am trying to sort of pontificate my approach, but I think there are three fundamental recommendations I at least ask innovators and investors to think about before they overly leverage themselves in Web3, or if they overly leverage themselves in brick and mortar. The first is, what are you really trying to solve? Now, in the Omniverse Sports League, the problem statement that we tried to solve was not just that leagues went bankrupt, but we have athletes and coaches from 31 different countries. Every major and minor possible faith. We have our athletes speak 42 languages. So for us, it's not just about being a North America thing. I need to be as relevant to the single mom of 5 in Central Africa who has a wonderful idea as I do the CEO of a Fortune 100 down the street of Portland. I am responsible to all people equally, and that's the power of the centralization. That's the first. The second thing is, with all due respect, and I spent a lot of my life in Seattle. I have a lot of dear friends up in Meta, but I myself, as a 47-year young minor league athlete, do not want to wear goggles 19 hours a day. I don't think I will be always open for that conversation, but I myself would like to go catch a baseball, hit a baseball, make new friends, learn a language. So I believe that in an Omniverse model where you still have to always be accountable in the physical universe is critical, not just, all jokes aside, but it's also critical if you really want to authentically evangelize diversity, equality, inclusion. You can't just have a $5,000 hardware entrance barrier and say, oh, it's free. That we're not being honest with each other. The third area of an omniverse model is, and this is, I think, where you and I really struck a chord is, it's not just about tripling your investment. And I'm a businessman. I want to triple my investment. But at the same time, I want the single mom in Central Africa whose only issue was she just happened not to be born near Wall Street. To me, it's unacceptable that she can't have her idea with sports, business, patents, science, bakery, cultural. Like, if not us, who? If not now, when? And I don't feel that in Web3 being socially responsible and making money is in conflict. I think they're both the same. And to me, that's the power of the Omniverse.
I agree. I look at business as a whole as the monetization of value, having the appropriate business model behind it. But with that value in place, it is very welcomed by all sides. And I have to ask, I like to get a sense of the before, during, and after. There was a saying years back, the first rule of enterprise blockchain, you do not mention the word blockchain. Kind of playing off the Fight Club quote. But the reason why is you didn't want to go over people's head. You didn't want to scare, let's say, a sports league by something they didn't fully understand. So for me, it's a monumental feat that you've been able to build these partnerships. I'm curious how it went in terms of forming these conversations, getting these groups to sign on. And why do you think there's been such a different reception to Web3 than some of the blockchain conversations that we were having in 2017, 2018?
Jason, great question. And I harken back to what you and I shared before the show, which is you and I are entrepreneurs at heart. I believe that morally, if we are serious about Web3 adoption and not just making a quick buck, 70% of the legwork is demystifying this. Now, you and I have the benefit of living in this world. So like any language or skill, we're comfortable even with the unknown because we are wired to learn. But to your point, the hardest part and the scariest part that I had to sell to my investors was if this was going to really work, we have to actually sit down and show everyone what the code looks like, how a smart contract is actually coded, and then be patient because I've found that as coming from a family where English was not spoken as the native language, we had $12. I have a silver dollar behind this laptop to remind me to not ever be too arrogant. I don't believe that I'm better than anyone. In fact, I'm probably very normal, but I have a stamina that I need to empower the ecosystem to understand. That being said, we ask every athlete, coach, and investor in the Omniverse Sports League to really work with us every quarter to see line by line of code, the advancements of how blockchain can be coded more efficiently, how getting your NFT on the blockchain can be 4 or 5 different ways. What do we want to be socially responsible about? And be comfortable that even though you and I might understand it in an hour, it might take 15 hours. But if you and I are going to really empower people, we have to empower people and not just look sexy on a podcast. I think that's been both our superpower, but also, Jason, to be honest, in terms of an operational strategic plan, we build that into our growth pattern and we're willing to invest in it. So it is a labor of love, but I believe it is essential for us to be successful.
Agreed. And imagine there was a lot of obstacles along the way. And, now you guys are even looking at bigger goals to the future. Where are things going in 2022, 2023, for the sports league, for the entire ecosystem from your perspective? But, where are discussions going? Where will the league be sitting later this year and next?
I think, when we talked about how you and I both want to empower investors and entrepreneurs, there were 3 key areas. Number one, you and I talked about before the show, had the pandemic not happened, I don't think we'd be having this conversation until 2026. I think until everyone on earth had to get a call from their local leader that said, don't come to work tomorrow, there's a pandemic, figure it out digitally. Neurologically, this conversation was 4 years out. So number one,
Easily.
the planet is neurologically accepting of a digital way of expressing themselves, not to replace, but to accept. The second thing that I think is critical in this space for our league, but I believe for all investors, is there is always a default safe space where you get enough government, enough brick and mortar, enough investment support, where you double your investment and you call it good. But being that I'm soon to be a 48-year young minor league baseball player, I remember in Web 2, there was a moment around 1998 where we could have actually, as a global community, embraced web retail, but we punted for 5 more years because we didn't have the courage to actually see it through. I believe we as investors have to actually see it through and not just be satisfied with the base use cases, but the real double click, triple click use cases. The third area is that Web3, and you and I are comfortable, we work with Fortune 100 clients. I, of course, have done very well working for a large shoe company who I'm massively proud of. But until we empower the single mom of 5 in Africa, for her in an analog telephone to be able to access a metaverse and not have it crash, for her to be able to make transactional decisions that can be patented, copyrighted, brought to normal exchanges, I think that we're kidding ourselves. So I think that for you and I and others, the call to action is, are we going to be like everybody else before and cash out and go? Or are we going to be more than our commercials? And I challenge us, myself included, let's be more than what we say we are.
It's a good challenge. I accept here, and it's a good gesture to be having out there in the ethos, like being able to have, I'm going to a lot of conferences again, groups that I meet at shows, thinking in that same capacity. I think that much more is possible. And, what really stood out to me about what you're creating, about the Sports Omniverse, and how you're fitting into your larger vision as a result and democratizing this for everybody. It's really the blend of digital, Web3, blockchain, NFT gaming, incorporating esports leagues. I've been able to speak with coaches of esports leagues. I have an understanding of what's going on in tournaments in all parts of the world and how it's surpassing interest in sports you and I grew up with, sports you played directly in. It's remarkable to think where it could be at in years to come and how you guys are at the forefront, evangelizing it, bringing more individuals into play, setting up models for people to monetarily benefit off of it as well too. And thinking about all the individuals, I know you guys have, a high volume of OSL athletes, coaches, physical tournaments happening all on top of the esports and having that all managed. Are these self-organized groups? Is it the players, the teams that are involved that are putting this together? Is this all your team? How does it continue to grow to allow for that mass, to allow for millions or more people to be engaging in the Omniverse?
Great question. We do a hybrid model. Number one, we are actually a rather, for lack of a better word, a centralized league in a decentralized format. So what we provide, our investor group has deep experience in esports professional leagues and professional real world sports leagues. So we give the structure from a business perspective for these different teams to understand how to operate under a single brand. So we really provide a understanding of, here's how to maximize metadata from a metaverse perspective. Here's how to really operationalize what you're doing from a professional perspective. But I believe that the decentralized part is that we don't micromanage our fan base. We don't nickel and dime our athletes. But from a business perspective, we're pretty locked in. And I think that that's been critical for our growth model, that we have 3 fundamental beliefs in the Omniverse Sports League. Number one, I talk to 30 or 40 amazing athletes a week who are unemployed because they just ran out of league. To me, that's barbaric. Like I can't even fathom, like here I am, I'm 48, I get to play a couple of games, but just because these athletes were told by one coach your career is over and you're a Division One, I can't even accept that. So number one, we say, no, your career's not over. But the second thing that we say is that there was a great unlock. Like I'm never going to compete against the NFL, NBA, MLB. That's not who we are. But what we do is we say, by the way, if you're a single mom in Africa and you want to also connect with the athletes or participate in ownership or have a fair way to express your ideas and innovation, you have full control. We don't nickel and dime you, we empower you. And being respectful, I'm not sure every professional league actually does that. I'll leave it at that. We'll leave it. The third real unlock is on the technological side, because you and I both talked about this coming into this show. Everyone uses the metaverse as if it's like the same type of coding standard, but you and I both know most companies are so desperate to be first to market. The physical lines of code are actually anti-eco-friendly. What we actually challenge as a centralized brand is we're not going to just throw something out there and hope that miners just don't call us out. We're going to invest, even though it's more operational cost, to code our digital metaverse Web3 blockchain presence correctly so that we actually back up who we are. And I believe that that actually has been the real differentiation. When our athletes or our coders can actually say we stand by the integrity of our platform, that's how we can compete against larger leagues who are 1,000 times more fold vested, but may not actually be vested in the statements that they evangelize on their commercials.
Sure. And it's amazing that you've been able to go up against those type of groups and be disruptive in this space. I mean, what an intimidating competitor at that. And I understand different leagues, different sports, different groups, finances, the opportunity was there, but still, as a marketer, if I'm doing a competitor marketing audit, what I need to understand to be able to get an equal share of voice, it is definitely something that could seem like an insurmountable obstacle. And want to talk about that a little bit. And you know, per the title of the show, we have a lot of founders that listen in, VC types, marketing professionals as well. Would love to get some of your recommendations and based on your experiences here for them, if they're looking to create in the metaverse, in an omniverse, you know, with their project as a whole, what are some insights that you could share? What are some things that they could test for their rollout?
It's a great question. And you know, you and I shared before this show that for every investor, fundamentally, you need to be first honest about your own personal risk threshold. And you have to be also honest about what is it in terms of how confident do you need to be in knowing what you're investing versus going with market trends. But that being said, I myself am deeply, deeply invested in private and public metaverses and blockchains. So I can talk to you as somebody who has a lot to lose on any given hour, depending on the market. There are three approaches that I have that I think are scalable, even regardless of a person's individual risk threshold. Number one, I just do not feel comfortable sinking years of my earnings in any investment that I don't know. So I myself understand that reading contracts or reading e-contracts or reading code is not sexy. But if we're being honest with ourselves, the difference between those who have made 100 or 1,000 times fold, they're the people that at 5 a.m. on a Sunday, when everyone else is sleeping, are actually reading prospectus or reading code. So wealth is not sexy, but then again, that is a differentiation. So number one, I recommend putting in what other people say boring because you already have a differentiation there. The second thing that I would say is, and Jason, we talked about this before, is you do not have to be a computer science major to actually challenge the code. But like, I'm not a international mortgage expert, but when I buy land, I go line by line with my attorney and my accountant on the contract before I sign my name. So what I would say is, don't be intimidated by, wait, I didn't grow up in Silicon Valley coding blockchain. Well, neither did I, but neither did Elon. Neither did Jeff, right? Neither did, neither did Warren. But those leaders are willing to actually ask hard questions of people who will give blunt answers that they trust. I recommend that fully, especially in Web3. The third is, and this is more of a philosophical approach, but the question is, what does Web3 as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur mean to you? If you look at it like a stock, then yeah, I would treat it like a penny stock or a NASDAQ stock, and that's fine. I'm not here to judge. But the question I ask is, if 25 years ago, Jason and I came to you and said, hey, instead of just buying a paper printout, you can order something online, you would be laughed out of the room. And by the way, I'm grateful for my family coming to America. Like, I grew up in Seattle. Amazon was laughed out of the room in 1996. So my question is really, if you're investing just to flip a token, cool, then go for it. But I would ask you, the real depth is, if you could actually rebuild a complete new economic and social paradigm that, because of encryption, reduces human friction points to actually make people better, what do you really want to do in the next quarter, year, and 3 years? Just asking those questions, I think, puts you in a better position to meet your financial goals and your deeper legacy goals as an entrepreneur.
Going line for line, having mentorship, looking at how it impacts the community and therefore the value and the growth that's available to the organization. And I'm a strong supporter of that. It's a good idea for leaders to be able to remove hats, but not until they understand the genetic makeup and responsibilities of said hat. Going line for line, like you mentioned, I'm not an expert. When I'm buying land, I'm still going line by line to understand everything that I'm agreeing to, all the ins and outs. You probably get different brainstorms, different strategies and tactics come to mind while doing so. You're able to apply your strategic expertise over here to discussions over there. Don't just blindly throw things to another team member or vendor. Actually figure out what they're all about. Have a mentor. It can be confronting. They could shoot you straight, like you mentioned, and it could be deflating, but you're not really looking towards them for a pat on the back. You're looking to grow, and that is far more rewarding. And then potentially the pat on the back that comes later on is tenfold more exciting, more fulfilling. So I definitely think having that. I've heard it referred to recently as cheat codes. So someone who's been down a similar path, maybe the path doesn't exist yet, but they've done it in a similar field or at a different time in a way that resembles it. They can save you things that'll save you. They could share things with you that'll save you time, save you money. Could be the difference of success and failure. Highly get behind that, and make sure the cause is noble. Make sure that it does do more than just show a return, that it has an actual contribution. And yes, in my experience as well too, the contribution, what comes back, it's that much more appetizing. It's that much more impactful and fulfilling for all parties involved. So I think those are great recommendations. What about when it's not working? How can one optimize? If you're Amazon in 96 per your analogy, and there's some success, but at the same time, you're not hitting the benchmarks you want. Maybe friends in a different area of the industry doing really well. That's starting to look more attractive, but you're committed to the goal. What can you do to improve performance? Whether it's there, you just want to see it at a greater level, or whether it's non-existent. Your initial efforts are non-fruitful, non-productive. How do you go about problem solving in those scenarios?
That's a great question. And I want to be honest to you and the listeners is, while I'm very proud of the success we've had, the hardest part of my job is a 50% I have to leave on the table because we're not doing it well enough, or
Sure.
we're not ready to show up. So what I would say is that for any entrepreneur or investor is, the first fundamental question I have for economics is, and no matter where you were born on the world, is if you want to make a transaction and you could make it by pressing a button where hard, complicated calculus ensures that you get your decision, or you have 78 strangers who add 28% markup. So which one do you want? Right? And this is a rhetorical question based on your audience, but it takes a lot of courage because we are living in still a Web 2, or some countries in a Web 1 paradigm where nobody trusts each other, and that lack of trust is actually built on artificial touch points that folks have to then use for roles to slow down business. So the first question is, obviously rhetorically, nobody wants that. But the second point is, think about it from a confidence perspective. When has disruption ever been sexy for the institution? Like, never. Like, why would a company that's 9 generations being a middle person slowing down a contract be like, you know what, you're right, Jason, let's just go distributed ledger? Like, no. But that's where real wealth, innovation, courage, and market share are built. The third thing I would say is the beauty of Web3 is you can authentically hedge your bets. So am I heavily vested in crypto? I am. I pick each crypto for a specific reason in terms of the code, how it's used. Not that everyone has to do that, but I'm also vested in Web3 by blockchain design, by working with companies for private blockchain, by being commissioner of the Omniverse Sports League, which is a public area. The whole beauty of decentralized software and businesses, you can have 7 different use cases still part of your strategic banner. So what I would say is, Jason, you ask a healthy question, which goes back to risk. You and I cannot tell any of your investors if you go 1 or 7 paths. But what I would say is, there is no reason not to do Web3, no more than there was a reason back in the day when people said, you know what, someday you won't need to light a candle in New York City, there'll be electricity. Electricity, are you crazy? No, it's candles. It's the same paradigm. But and Jason, we've talked about this. It's one thing to watch the movie. It's scary to be the one to press the button. But if not you, who? And that, I think, is where we're trying to empower your listeners to say, scary can be good as long as you're purposeful in how you disrupt.
Purposeful, intentional. If you're getting anxiety around it, good. That means it's important. That means it's worth your time. That means it checks the last box of what you're sharing for testing and making sure it's actually something the world really needs. And think that's excellent recommendations. But you've obviously had massive success across your projects. And as you mentioned, it's part of the team. And there's always something else you're looking at, always something that's being left on the table. I certainly feel that my businesses, the groups I've seen that we've worked with over the years, even in investments. Wow, this one worked great. Yeah, but I could have put more in. That is a constant discussion. I think we've touched on some things like that as well too. But how do you operate at scale? How can you ramp things up to a critical mass? What are the keys to it?
I think for Web3, and this is both the most exciting and hardest neurological change for investors, is in a Web2 sports league, we would nickel and dime athletes, sign them to contracts that only advance the league. We would have coaches, we would hire and fire, we would maximize in-stadium sales, and that's fine. Like I'm a minor league baseball player, like I'm cool with that. But that is not at all Web3. Web3 is, we're going to empower every single coach, player, supporter, how they on their own, without us, can make money on the NFT side, how they can have a digital footprint in Web3. We have a brand standard, but we're not here to micromanage the smart contracts. We're telling athletes, look, you don't need to give us any money. Just follow these basic standards so you can represent yourself in the league well. Because why? Because, Jason, for every amazing, happily fan or coach or player, guess what they do? They go to their 17 social medias and say, I love the Omniverse Sports League. Everybody wins. So instead of, you will never see an Omniverse Sports League strike. You'll never see a player's CBA contract not go well. You'll never see players say things like, well, I need to wait until my 3rd player option on my re-sign to make, because that's Web2 thinking. But what I would say, to not overly represent myself, is it is a 15-minute by 15-minute trench warfare because the code, the standards, the hardware to support the metaverses is changing literally every 15 minutes. So it is our responsibility as league officials, it's my responsibility as a commissioner to ensure that I'm always looking in the next hour, week, year, half decade, so that we're not left holding the bag if a larger glacial change happens. But I do believe that that's the fun part of investing is it's always knowing that you are always going against larger tides. But again, and I'm Elon Musk agnostic, right? I'm not a fan nor a foe, but I would say is that the reality is he was a 22-year-old young man from a country that was not very popular in the 80s and who was in 2008, 36 hours away from insolvency if the fourth rocket didn't magically work. Whether you like him or you don't like him, and Elon, even if you don't like me, I know that you like sports, but whether you like him or you don't like him, that is what entrepreneurial spirit means. And I believe you have to be cool with that to really change the world and to really make real wealth.
What a analogy there. And to hear about the 2008 moment, that brings back different stories I've read on Elon's bio. But to be able to use that as the motivator for scale, to be able to use that for things that are actually meaningful and pushing towards it and doing whatever it takes to get it to those milestones and for what it creates for all of us. Definitely inspiring. I appreciate you opening up to us here, Justin. I feel like I'm getting some blueprints on how to launch a sports league, by the way, and just overall how to operate in an omniverse and in a very competitive vertical at that. Are there any final notes, any final thoughts you want to leave listeners with as we start to wind down this episode?
I think that the last slide, and Jason, I appreciate not only what you do, but I appreciate how you democratize and demystify this. I think what you do is critical for adoption. But the last thing, and I mean this sincerely, I believe every single one of your listeners can do what I do better. And I'm cool with saying that. I think that the power of Web3 is it's not to build up walls. It's not to scare off people. I want one of your listeners to build a better Omniverse sports league because in the end, the moment when every person can be on Web3, it becomes not where you were born or not your last name, not your passport. It's purely about, is your idea better than mine? And like any sports athlete, let's settle on the field and let the best team win.
Well said. Well said. I like the invitation. It leaves it open for everybody. Definitely democratize it. That's what we're all doing. That's what it's all about. And for a better tomorrow, for a better dynamic for all of us. So appreciate that. And Justin, if any listeners are hearing you speak and saying, hey, I need to get in touch with Mr. Lacche, I need to figure out how we could collaborate, or maybe, can get some cheat codes, maybe, a few mentor notes, maybe there's something you guys could do together in terms of work. What's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
We keep it very simple. If you're an investor, hit us up on LinkedIn. If you're a sports fan, just go to the Omniverse Sports League. My cell phone is there. I'm always available. And this is shocking. Jason nor I, we don't charge money. We actually just talk to you like a human being. I know that that's a very shocking statement, but I would just say that it's the hardest part people have is that they think that maybe they need to have an idea that they don't think is big enough. As Jason and I both champion, there is no idea that's too big or small. Take the first step. You have a lot of people who care about your ideas. Let's talk.
100%. I echo that. Do not be bashful. Take Justin up on that invitation. Reach out to him. Cell phone, it's bold. Do the same for me as well. Find me on LinkedIn. Reach out on our site. These resources, that mentorship that Justin was mentioning, is available to you. And want to thank everybody for listening in. As Justin mentioned, we all have the opportunity to do this, and this is how it's done, through discussions like this. Justin, thank you again for coming on. Excited about what we're putting out.